From bathing once a year to washing clothes in urine, these are the most filthy, bizarre, and downright horrifying hygiene habits of the Middle Ages. Number 10, bathing once a year if you were lucky. Let's start with the obvious. Medieval people were not bathing champions. In fact, depending on the time and place, people might bathe once a month, once a year, or not at all. Some of this was because hot water wasn't easy to come by. You had to heat it over a fire, drag it into a tub, and share it with the entire family, often in descending order of importance. Yes, that meant dad bathed first, mom second, and the kids last in the murky human soup. The baby often got the dirtiest bathwater of all, which is where the phrase "don't throw the baby out with the bathwater" supposedly came from. But things got worse in the late Middle Ages. Public bathhouses, which had once been popular in cities, started to be associated with immorality, disease, and even sin. By the time the plague swept through Europe, people genuinely believed water opened the pores and let disease seep into the body. So many just avoided bathing altogether. The cleanliness solution was to change shirts or rub yourself down with a dry cloth. Spoiler, that did not work. Royalty wasn't exempt either. King Louis XIV of France famously took only a handful of baths in his entire life. He bragged about it as if smelling like a cheese shop on fire was a sign of health. Imagine attending court in layers of velvet and fur while marinating in years of accumulated sweat. So, if you've ever thought your roommate was gross for skipping showers, just remember, at least they don't believe bathing will literally kill them. Number 9, chamber pots and flying waste. Now let's talk toilets, or rather, the lack of them. Medieval people didn't have bathrooms the way we do today. Instead, they had chamber pots, portable buckets that you kept under the bed or in a corner, and when it filled up, you simply dumped it out the window into the street below. That's why medieval streets were often described as rivers of filth. Imagine walking to work and getting hit with a surprise splash of medieval rain from someone's second-floor window. People carried long cloaks not just for warmth, but also to protect their clothes from flying waste. Even castles weren't much better. Royals had garderobes, essentially holes in the wall that emptied straight into the moat. That means the picturesque moat you see around a medieval castle was often more of a giant sewage pit. No wonder they smelled like open graves. Cities did try to regulate this horror show. Some laws banned dumping waste at certain hours or required people to shout "Gardyloo" before tossing it, but let's be honest, hearing a warning yell right before being pelted with airborne feces isn't much of a consolation. So the next time you flush a toilet, be grateful for plumbing. Medieval folks had to dodge falling projectiles of human waste just to make it to market. Number 8, dentistry without anesthesia. Dental hygiene was not a thing in the Middle Ages. Toothbrushes, toothpaste, floss, none of it existed. People sometimes chewed herbs or rubbed ashes on their teeth, but mostly they just let them rot. Cavities, infections, and toothaches were so common that they were considered a normal part of life. And when a tooth hurts too much to bear, the solution was brutal. Barber surgeons, not trained dentists, but the same guys who cut your hair, were usually the ones yanking teeth. Their tools included pliers, tongs, and even hammers. There was no anesthesia, no numbing agents, nothing. You sat in a chair, someone held you down, and the barber ripped the tooth out by brute force. If the tooth didn't come out cleanly, they kept digging until it did. Sometimes the jaw broke in the process and infection was almost guaranteed. But wait, it gets worse. If people couldn't afford extractions, they turned to folk remedies like applying live worms, dog teeth, or frog parts to the sore spot. Spoiler, these did not work. People often died, not from the toothache itself, but from the raging infections it caused. So next time you complain about waiting for your dentist appointment, remember it's better than having your molar hammered out by the same guy who shaved your uncle's beard that morning. Number 7, hair washing. Try lice combing. Forget luxurious shampoos or conditioners. Medieval people rarely washed their hair, and lice were a fact of daily life. Fleas, ticks, and other critters also made themselves comfortable in both hair and clothing. To manage this problem, people used fine-tooth combs to scrape out lice and nits, or they shaved their heads entirely and wore wigs. Wigs themselves often became infested with lice too, so it was basically a never-ending cycle of scratching and combing. Perfumed powders and oils were also used to mask the smell of greasy hair, but they didn't stop infestations. Monks often shaved their heads in the famous tonsure style, the bald spot with a ring of hair, partly for religious reasons, but also because it was easier to deal with pests that way. Some cures for lice were downright bizarre. One remedy recommended smearing garlic and butter on your scalp, which probably just made you smell like an Italian kitchen while the lice kept partying. Others burned herbs or fumigated clothing, but results were mixed at best. So yeah, medieval hair care was less about shine and volume and more about survival. If you've ever complained about dandruff, just be glad you're not living in a century where your scalp doubled as an insect Airbnb. Number 6, perfume as a bath substitute. If you didn't want to stink, but you also didn't want to risk death by bathing, what could you do? Enter perfume. Medieval nobles and royalty practically drowned themselves in scented oils and powders. Instead of soap and water, you covered the smell of sweat, grime, and old food particles with roses, lavender, musk, or whatever concoction the apothecary had on hand. Essentially, people walked around smelling like a flower garden on top of a barnyard. Perfumes weren't just for the wealthy, though. Herbal sachets and pomanders, little balls filled with spices and flowers, were carried around by everyone who could afford them. They were thought to protect against disease, especially during the plague. The theory was that bad smells, called miasma, carried illness, so if you sniffed something nice, you were safe. Spoiler, they were very, very wrong. The obsession with perfume became so strong that some nobles were described as reekers of scent. They weren't exaggerating, they could smell certain members of the French court before they entered the room. Instead of fresh laundry or soap, you got waves of musk and sweat marinated in fur-lined clothing. It's kind of ironic. They believed perfume kept them healthy, but all it really did was make their unwashed bodies smell like a potpourri factory caught fire. At least it gave later centuries the concept of cologne and perfume, but back then, it was less Chanel No. 5 and more eau de decay. Number 5. Bedbugs and filthy bedding. Medieval beds may have looked fancy in castles and manors with carved wood frames and heavy curtains, but don't be fooled. Most were crawling with bedbugs, fleas, and lice. Feather mattresses and straw stuffing made the perfect homes for critters. Add in the fact that sheets were rarely washed, and you've got yourself a biohazard disguised as a bed. For peasants, it was worse. They often slept on sacks stuffed with straw directly on the floor, sometimes sharing them with family members and animals alike. Dogs, chickens, and even pigs sometimes slept in the same space, which meant your bedtime lullaby was squealing, clucking, and scratching, not exactly restful, and good luck staying warm under blankets that doubled as flea resorts. To deal with infestations, people beat their mattresses with sticks or left them in the sun to purge the bugs. Of course, this did little more than annoy the pests temporarily. Some even sprinkled herbs like rosemary or wormwood in their bedding to deter insects. Did it work? Not really. So, while today you might complain about changing your sheets, medieval folks would have killed for a fresh set of bug-free bedding. For them, bedtime wasn't sweet dreams, it was survival of the least bitten. Number 4. Shared bathwater, the family soup. When medieval families did decide to bathe, it wasn't exactly the relaxing spa experience you're imagining. Water was scarce, and heating it took effort, so everyone used the same tub of water. The father of the house bathed first, then the mother, then the kids, in order of age. By the time the baby was lowered in, the water looked like a stew of grime, sweat, and floating hair. Again, this is where the saying, "don't throw the baby out with the bathwater," supposedly originated. Public bathhouses worked the same way, but on a larger scale. Multiple strangers shared the same tubs, sometimes for hours. The water quickly turned into a cloudy soup of dirt and oils, and since these bathhouses often doubled as hangout spots and in some cases brothels, the cleanliness factor was questionable at best. Eventually, many towns banned bathhouses altogether because they were seen as sinful dens of disease. Ironically, this made personal hygiene worse. By the 16th century, people believed they were healthier if they just wiped themselves down with linen cloths and skipped bathing entirely. Spoiler again. They were not healthier. So next time you complain about someone taking too long in the shower, be grateful you're not standing in a line to reuse their water after they're done. Number 3. Medieval tooth care. We already covered dental torture, but what about prevention? Well, medieval tooth care was almost non-existent. Toothbrushes hadn't arrived in Europe yet, so people relied on twigs, cloths, or just their fingernails to scrape gunk off their teeth. A common tooth powder was made of crushed herbs, ashes, or even ground up animal bones. Yes, brushing your teeth with burnt deer bones was a thing. And breath? Oh, that was a whole different battlefield. Without toothpaste or mouthwash, most people walked around with dragon breath. Some chewed parsley or mint leaves to mask the odor, but it didn't help much if your teeth were already rotting out of your skull. Bad teeth were such a problem that people made jokes and songs about them. Having blackened, stumpy teeth was so normal that it wasn't even considered unattractive. In fact, in some medieval love poetry, a tooth smile simply meant the person still had some teeth left, a compliment in its own way. So, yes, medieval romance was basically, wow, she still has molars. Number 2. Washing clothes in urine. Here's a fun one. Urine wasn't considered waste. It was seen as a cleaning product. That's right. Medieval laundry sometimes used human or animal urine to bleach and clean fabric. Why? Because urine contains ammonia, which actually does break down stains. Buckets of collected urine were left to ferment before being used on clothes, making laundry days smell like a chemical toilet. Fullers, people who specialized in cleaning cloth, literally stomped on fabrics in vats of stale urine to soften and whiten them. They did this barefoot too. Imagine spending your entire workday ankle deep in what amounted to medieval Fabrizi. It was backbreaking and disgusting, but it was one of the most important jobs in textile production. Ordinary people sometimes soaked their own clothes in weaker urine mixtures, then rinsed them in rivers or wells, which of course spread contamination to the very water sources people drank from. And you wonder why the disease was rampant. So the next time you throw your laundry in a modern washing machine, whisper a little thank you to science. At least your socks aren't being stomped on in week-old pee. Number 1. Bloodletting as cleansing. Finally, let's talk about the ultimate medieval hygiene fail, bloodletting. The belief was that illnesses came from an imbalance of the body's humors, and one way to fix it was to drain blood. Basically, people thought losing a pint or two was the equivalent of a health cleanse. Fever? Bloodletting. Headache? Bloodletting. Acne? Definitely bloodletting. Doctors, or sometimes just barbers, used knives, leeches, or special bleeding bowls to drain you. And of course, this cure often made patients weaker, sicker, or dead. Unsanitary tools spread infections, and excessive bleeding caused shock. But hey, at least your humors were balanced, right? This wasn't just for commoners either. Kings and queens submitted to bloodletting regularly. George Washington was bled so aggressively by doctors that it likely sped up his death. In the Middle Ages, people swore by it so much that bleeding out was considered a respectable form of medical care. So, while modern cleanses involved juice and yoga, medieval cleanses involved draining half your body's blood and hoping for the best. Honestly, give me overpriced kale smoothies any day. Thank you for watching and sticking till the end. We've got plenty more videos coming in the future. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss them. See you in the next one.